Hi, this is Mehdi.
Hey, this is Fran.
This is Total Tactics Football. Last night, Spain beat Germany 6-0. Fran, how important was this Spanish win and why were they so overwhelmingly good?
Yeah, I think it has to come down to the fact that Luis Enrique has tried multiple different setups, and his tinkering, finally worked out in a game where I would say Germany was at their absolute worst and missed some key players, not just due to Löw's kind of own positioning and kind of choosing of the squad, but the fact that someone like Kimmich, who's kind of quintessential right now for Germany, was injured. And we saw Spain operate in a 4-1-4-1 system, bring Morata back into the fold, and that was extremely effective versus Germany's back four. I think having these kind of slightly slower fullbacks in the system meant that Germany were kind of pushed back by Spain's front five. Spain finally having these kind of archetypes like Ferran Torres and Dani Olmo means that they sort of finally have these players who can play out wide at times, but also kind of tuck in whenever they want to kind of press the back line. And that's something I think Spain has missed lately, because if you see, for example, let's say in their World Cup performance, they really struggled when they played a false nine and were pushed much deeper into the field. Here in this formation, the 4-1-4-1 allows Spain to push that much more further forwards. And you can see it being reflected by the kind of heat map of the Spanish midfield. And ultimately, I think, you have to give credit to Enrique's bringing up of players like Fati, Ferran Torres, and Olmo into the fold and kind of rejuvenating Spain's style of play. How do you think Ferran Torres and Olmo played?
I feel like they were excellent. Here, where you mentioned Ferran Torres, Fati, who's injured unfortunately, but Olmo, they provided the width needed to be able to play and open up Germany. Ferran Torres hugged the right hand side often and interlapped with Sergio Roberto, causing a lot of problems for, Max and Koch. See, the problem, like we mentioned here, is when you have players who have started to form partnerships, you can create sort of gaps in between a opposition's defense. And considering Cruz, with due to his unagility and the fact that he's not the best at defending, there were these gaps open up for Ferran Torres to be able to exploit. And he's able to create several chances during the game. And he looked in the right mood. He's someone who's fast and quick. And at the same time, the best thing about him is that not just good on the ball, he likes to also operate off the ball. And that is something that you don't get a lot on the Spanish side because everyone wants to be on the ball to create chances. Having a player like Ferran Torres gives you the ability to have someone to aim at. And obviously, he shows that he has the ability to score too.
No, I agree. And I think ultimately the performance also really reflected how good Koke is as a player. He was playing here in a more kind of right sentiment position, but also in a more freer role. How do you think he operated?
I feel like he gave this midfield a sort of dynamicism that was required. Rodri sat in the deep in the hole as he likes to for Man City and can dictate the play. But when you have the likes of Fabian Ruiz and Koke sort of operating right in front of him, they give you the athleticism and the passing range that is needed to be able to cause a very static midfield a lot of trouble. And we saw Koke, for the first goal that he created for Ferran Torres, how he moved to the wings and put in a lovely ball for Dani Olmo. We saw how he would grab the ball in midfield, and instead of playing a short pass to the fullback, he would try to look for like a player like Torres. And I feel like his progression of the ball, his hard work that Diego Simeone's player would naturally have, is what kind of gave this life to the Spanish team. And I feel that this might be a midfield trio that Enrique should consider in his mind to maybe keep playing them for the upcoming games and the European Championship.
It'll be interesting to see how Thiago competes with that. But I think moving on to Germany, they had a midfield, but it was quite the opposite, really. I think Cruz in later years has been kind of marked out as a player who's really struggled in the German side, and also kind of adapting to this sort of modern game where there's a lot of high press back and forth. And I think the issue is that when you can see him play with Real Madrid, he's at least covered, or at least His weaknesses in terms of not being able to track back effectively on time, versus a very fast counterattack, it is Casemiro as an example. And here you play Gundogan, someone who's in a very similar mold to Cruz, perhaps a little bit more technical and agile on the ball, but it has also aged and really struggles to kind of keep up with the pace of these fast transitions in the modern game. And I think Germany set up with a 4-2-3-1 today. It was a sort of offensive 4-3-3 where you see Goretzka kind of move into a 10 position at times. And what that means is that Kroos and Gundogan, despite playing in the central midfield position, have to support breaking it down attacks on the wings. And both of them are equally unable to do so. And ultimately, I think one of the issues with this German side as well is that a lot of these goals, I mean, to lose 6-0 means that there are clearly defensive issues. It's not just the setup of Löw. You can see in clearly many instances how key Kimmich is missing, because a lot of the gaps are created in this sort of defensive mid position that we have come to know in football. And this gap is created by the fact that both Gundogan and Kroos have to move forwards to kind of support the play, because they're both not ball carriers, because they like to pass and kind of link up with teams. Although Kroos can sometimes kind of go for a diagonal, he has to kind of push up naturally so that he can link up with players and create these 1-2s. That means that him and Gundogan have to kind of track back for one another when one pushes forward, and that clearly wasn't the case yesterday. As a result, you see Germany have this kind of symmetry where they're pushed too far forward, and even with kind of, I'd say, defensive mispositionings from sort of their center backs in Kock, for example, you see issues kind of arise, and then something that doesn't seem to occur often, 3-on-2s, where the Spanish front three is able to kind of play so easily on the counter and kind of look for these kind of easy passes to someone off the ball. And it just comes down to the fact that these players are just not defensively set up to play in this system.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we saw that the lack of this midfield getting on the ball, and the way they were set up meant that they were trying to create through Sule. He in the early half, in the first half, he was pinging the balls towards Max and to Werner to try to get bypass Spain's midfield. The problem with that is that Sule isn't the best ball playing center back, and that's not his fault. It's just the style of center back that he is. Secondly, like you mentioned, with a midfield that has to now sort of push up and find, they're trying to play in a way that they're not comfortable in, something that you do not want Kroos in loads of space. He will not be able to track back. This meant that Koch and Sule, or in time later on, Jonathan Thaw, who came in the second half, had to push up. And uncharacteristically, Koch would sometimes go so far ahead that he would leave the other center back completely alone. And now, as you mentioned, okay, you want to win the ball up high up the pitch, but there is a sort of defensive responsibility that you need to have. And these players are, professional players who play in the top leagues. They need to understand that, okay, if two of you are pressing up front, at least the third one should be committing as well. And this is where the manager needs to come in and decide, okay, he can see this has happened for a few goals now. There's time to seal the ship, tell your players to settle. And this is where the leadership was lacking. And in second half, as we saw, you had Jonathan Tah come in. He as well would push high up into the midfield, allowing Gundogan and Kroos to be a bit more. And Spain expertly would counter from there. And like you mentioned, they would end up in these 2v3 situations. I feel one of the other reasons why they couldn't even create as well, the fact that we know Kimmich is such a talented player who could play right back and defensive mid, but Germany needs two Kimmich at this moment because they lack that right back and they lack that defensive mid. And Ginter, who's a solid center back, cannot provide you that sort of creativity and that offensive outlet from that right hand side, which meant that Max would have to push high up on the left hand side. And again, due to that, Kroos has to drop into that position or go wide to cover for Max, which was just an imbalance all over the team. And I feel this is now, you've had a 6-0 beating. This is not a good look. You're a few months away from the European Championship. They need to look at this system. They need to look at these errors together and decide how can you sort of mitigate all these issues that are in this team and find a way to be able to actually come back.
No, I agree with that. And I think obviously you have to say one player shouldn't be able to kind of reverse, a 6-0 result. It's not on the fact that Germany have to find another Kimmich. And I think they have players in the mold that can play. I think you have to look at Hummels. You have to look at his fantastic form. If you're looking for a ball playing defender who's able to actually bypass the press and actually effectively launch balls to Germany's best players, which is their offensive players and their wingers, then that's who you need to look at. If you want to play a 4-2-3-1 structure, then you want to actually play someone who can play in the 10 spot comfortably, someone like Muller, who will actually allow Goretzka to kind of play further back and carry the ball at times, because simply Gundogan and Kroos are not able to do so. If you look at, for example, the way Chelsea play, given the fact they actually have 2-star German players in their team with Werner and Havertz, they play Havertz or Mason Mount in the midfield as part of a 4-3-3. And the way it works at times, moving into 4-3-1, is that someone like Havertz or Mount can carry the ball from defense all the way into the feet of Gnabry and Sané. Here you can actually see a still where Gnabry has to drop so far back just to start a counterattack. And by that time, it's not really a counterattack at all. It's just, Germany trying to create something out of nothing. But fast dynamic counterattacks in this kind of high pressing modern climate, which players like Sané and Gnabry are so acclimated to, just means that you need to kind of install a ball carrier in this lineup. And I think, Löw has to look at bringing someone like Brandt or Havertz into the lineup and just go guns blazing, in a sense where you have to go more offensively, because clearly by having a more static, a more defensive approach, it's not working.